One of my favorite things about the Percy Jackson series is the unique way Rick Riordan was able to world build in established locations. For those who don't know, fantasy typically falls into two categories, high and low fantasy. High fantasy is distinguished by the author's decision to create a new world for the story. Think Westeros or the continent in Game of Thrones or The Song of Ice and Fire or The Witcher. And low fantasy, on the other hand, is known for being set in an already existing world. Examples of this include Harry Potter and Percy Jackson, and also my story, Seraphina Blackwood, The Curse of the Plague. So, it's pretty fair to say I'm partial to low fantasy, though I do appreciate high fantasy as well. In fact, I've reviewed the first Witcher book here on the channel, and the review for the second book is coming soon out on Medium, both of which I enjoyed. But one thing I loved is the way Rick Riordan was able to tie in the lore of Greek mythology into the modern United States by attaching it to existing infrastructure. Chiron's quote in The Lightning Thief always made me appreciate the genius in the way Riordan builds his world. Died? No. Did the West die? The gods simply moved to Germany, to France, to Spain for a while. Wherever the flame was brightest, the gods were there. They spent several centuries in England. All you need to do is look at the architecture. People do not forget the gods. Every place they've ruled for the last 3,000 years, you can see them in paintings and statues, on the most important buildings, and yes, Percy, of course, they are now in your United States. Look at your symbol, the Eagle of Zeus. Look at the statue of Prometheus in Rockefeller Center, the Greek facades of your government buildings in Washington. I defy you to find any American city where the Olympians are not prominently displayed in multiple places. However, Riordan's world building was still limited by the narrative. We were only able to learn as much about the world as Percy cared to or the plot dictated. And while I do think that Percy Jackson and the Olympians is the far tighter and thematically stronger story, the sequel, Heroes of Olympus, offered us so much in the world building department. We were introduced to Roman demigods, Camp Jupiter, the Titan stronghold in Mount Orthrus, located in San Francisco. We even got to follow the Seven to the original Rome. But one thing that always stood out to me, even the first time I read Son of Neptune, was that Camp Jupiter had a group of legionnaires known as Legacies. And for whatever the reason, Camp Half-Blood didn't. And so that finally brings us to the point I'm here to cover today, which is, what are legacies, and why didn't Camp Half-Blood have any? So before we can get into my theory about why Camp Half-Blood doesn't have any legacies, we need to figure out what they are. In Chapter 4 of the Son of Neptune, we get this conversation between Percy and a Roman demigod of Pluto, Hazel. Hazel laughed. Not all of them are children of major gods. There are hundreds of minor Roman gods. Plus, a lot of campers are legacies, second or third generation. Maybe their parents were demigods, or their grandparents. Percy blinked. Children of demigods? Why? Does that surprise you? Percy wasn't sure. The last few weeks, he'd been so worried about surviving day to day. The idea of living long enough to be an adult and have kids of his own, that seemed like an impossible dream. These legacies, Hazel corrected. They have powers like demigods? Sometimes not. But they can be trained. All the best Roman generals and emperors, they all claim to be descendants from gods. Most of the time, they were telling the truth. In short, a legacy is a descendant of a demigod parent. In some situations, they could be a quarter god, or has been seen multiple times throughout the series, even less. For example, according to the lore and his own pronouncements, Julius Caesar was a descendant of Venus, as he was a descendant of Aeneas, the Trojan hero. However, given the timelines and average lifespan, Caesar couldn't even be Aeneas' grandchild, considering that he was born in 100 BCE, and the Trojan War presumably happened in the 12th or 13th century BCE. That said, when it comes to the Legion of New Rome in the Heroes of Olympus, legacies are exceptionally common and ordinary, much more so than Julius Caesar. We have Octavian, the resident augur at Camp Jupiter, and a legacy of Apollo and Frank, just to name a couple. Also, being a legacy doesn't preclude you from being a demigod, as Frank was both a child of Mars, the Roman aspect of Ares, as well as a legacy of Poseidon, which didn't initially strike me as odd, but now it does because it means that Camp Jupiter will even recognize legacies of Greek descent. But that kind of segues perfectly into the next question being, why doesn't Camp Half-Blood have legacies? After all, as we just learned from Frank, they do in fact exist. So then what's the issue? For that I have two theories. The first is less likely and kind of stupid, and the second one is far more sensible. The first suggests that they would be welcomed at Camp Half-Blood if the need arose, but it simply hasn't. And while there can be some major irritating decisions regarding who can and cannot be allowed at Camp Half-Blood, the idea of Camp Half-Blood not needing them is absurd. The reason for this is because Chiron has known about the Great Prophecy for over 70 years, as it was given by the Oracle of Delphi shortly after World War II. For those who don't remember, the prophecy goes, "A half-blood of the eldest god shall reach 16 against all odds, and see the world in endless sleep. The hero's soul cursed blade shall reap. A single choice shall end his days, Olympus to preserve or raise." And while, of course, the big three gods say they aren't going to sire more demigod children, Chiron had to know there was no way they were going to follow through on that. Also, while it doesn't directly state that a war will happen, it wouldn't hurt to be on the safe side, and considering when wartime actually came, Camp Half-Blood had only 40 campers ready to fight until the Ares cabin finally decided to do something. I think it's safe to say that they could have needed the help. So that brings us on to theory 2. Greek demigods had shorter life expectancies than Roman ones. Obviously, I'm not talking about death by natural causes. Technically, both Percy and someone like Jason have average biological lifespans, if not even longer ones, due to their godly genetics. What I mean by life expectancy is that a Greek demigod is way more likely to be killed young than a Roman one. This is brought up as early as chapter 2 of The Lightning Thief, where Grover and Percy have a conversation about the fates cutting the pair of socks. Side note, when it's revealed what this event is really implying, it's perfect. I mean, what a twist. And if you want to hear me talk more about that scene, just go check out episode 2 of the Half-Blood Hill Show here on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. But anyway, back to the quote. Percy and Grover, while leaving from Yancey Academy, have the following interaction. "You saw her sniff the cord? Yeah, so? But even as I said it, I knew it was a big deal. This is not happening," Grover mumbled. He started chewing his thumb. "I don't want this to be like the last time." "What last time?" "Always 6th grade. They never get past 6th grade." For those of you who aren't really getting it, Grover is talking about how it's extremely common for Greek demigods, due to the dangers of monsters being attracted to them by their scent, to die before the end of their 6th grade year. If you can't remember how old that is, or you've done your best to suppress your memories of middle school, that's around 11 years old. And when your life expectancy only takes you to the ripe old age of 11, the idea of giving your mortal parents grandchildren is kind of out of the question. But then, don't Roman demigods have the same issue? I mean, they also attract monsters due to their scent, right? And of course that's true, but their method couldn't be more different than the Greeks. For the Greeks, typically, a satyr will pick you out of the crowd, talk to your mortal parent, watch over you to make sure that you are a demigod, and then do their best to usher you to Camp Half-Blood alive. But we actually have no clear estimate just how many Greek demigods slip through the cracks or even kick the bucket before they are ever found by a satyr. The Romans, though, they're a bit more metal. When considered old enough, Roman demigods are informed by either their mortal or immortal parent to head to a building called the Wolf House, where they will be trained by Lupa into someone of worth for the 12th Legion. To really put into perspective just how much more brutal this training is, the motto Lupa, the trainer of the Roman demigods, has is literally conquer or die. You don't hear any of the Greeks saying that while they're out playing capture the flag or something. If you even survive the Wolf House, you're then kicked out, pointed to the direction of Camp Jupiter, and Lupa basically shrugs and says, well, hope you make it. Once there, you are sorted into a cohort based on recommendation, and serve as part of the Legion for 10 years. Unlike the Greeks, who are more go with the flow, the Romans are structured and disciplined, moving as units on missions, which, outside of quests that seem to follow the same rules as the Greeks, typically involved larger team-centered tactics, ensuring higher survival rates and success. After you serve your 10 years, however, you are then allowed to retire into New Rome, which is an entire city filled with retirees from the Legion, and there you can go to college at New Rome University, get married, and of course, have children, all while being protected by the Legion and the god Terminus, the god of boundaries and the guardian of New Rome. And it's for that reason that Roman demigods are far more likely to be able to live to one day have legacies that can serve in the Legion than the Greeks, who basically roll the dice on their lives every single day. So with that, we understand why it is that legacies are far more common in Camp Jupiter than they are in Camp Half-Blood. Which now brings us to the question of the day. If you could decide to either be a camper at Camp Half-Blood or Camp Jupiter, which would you pick? I gotta be honest, even though I dunked on Camp Half-Blood almost this whole video, there's something charming about the summer camp feeling magical school trope that would just draw me to it. But that's just me. Be sure to tell me what you think in the comments below. And while you're down there, if you could be sure to drop a like and make sure you're subscribed, that would be awesome. But until next time, campers, stay safe, and I'll see you all in the next video. Peace. If you made it to this point in the video, I think it's fair to say you enjoyed it. And if you did, why don't you go ahead and subscribe before checking out some more of my work? On the right, you'll see a playlist to my podcast, The Half-Blood Hill Show, and on the left, you'll see one of my latest videos. Be sure to check them out, and as always, have a great rest of your day.